Okay, there we go. Can you,
Um,
there we go. All
I
right.
do you want me to record my end?
No, I think I got it. It let me press record, and it says it's recording right now. So I think it's working.
Okay.
All right. Well, how are
Cool.
you doing today?
I'm all right, man. I'm a little busy, so I remembered and then forgot and then remembered and then forgot and then remembered I was doing this. But no big deal. I was just chilling at home watching the Bill Burr episode of Star Wars and just got done and then you hit me up and I was like, "Oh, right. Well, I got all my stuff set up anyway." So, no
All
big
right.
deal. Nice Limp Biscuit art behind
Thank
you.
you. I got it. It's funny because the way I got it was I got it from a CD store that closed down a couple of years ago. So, like the guy, the manager of the store, he knew me because I always was in there. Because I'm the one weird kid who's born in the late '90s who still buys CDs. So he was like, "Hey," he messaged me. He was like, "Hey, I got something for you. Come by the store." And I was like, "Okay." I came by and then he gave it to me. I was like, "Oh, where was this?" He's like, "Oh, it was behind one of the things the other day, or when I was cleaning up the other day, and wanted you to have it." I was like, okay, cool, I'll take it. So yeah, it came to me by accident. That's like the only Limp Bizkit merch I have, as I haven't seen them in concert or anything, at least not yet, and haven't bought any of their merch anywhere because their merch is basically like not available at Hot Topic or any stores I ever go to. So yeah, but anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and start the show.
Sure.
So, hello, I'm Gregory Harden II. I am here with Jake Flores, comedian, who is apparently wanted by the entire intelligence apparatus. uh, so yeah, let me get into some of these questions here. So, you're a Bernie Sanders supporter, right?
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, you're gonna have to tell me, how is Bernie Sanders gonna win the election with his Brexit position? We can't win the Rust Belt with his current Brexit position. You're gonna have to
Right.
do that.
Yeah, that's so stupid, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's so transparent if you just like follow the news like it I'm sure you and I do, or you follow like the media rather,
Hmm.
that what happened last week is that Corbyn, who is a not one to one but pretty easy analog for explaining the most similar thing to someone like Bernie Sanders happening somewhere else in the world, looked like you might win. And then because labor is or left politics or whatever are so appealing and are such a strong movement, then he gets crushed in the
Yeah.
UK. And the explanation, could be a number of a few things. Everyone's like looking through the ashes right now and trying to figure it out. And one thing is, yeah, but Brexit is this huge issue that was like this third thing happening in that election. The other thing is that the media successfully smeared him as anti-Semitic, and
Hmm.
so now they had the fucking balls over here to just look at that and go, well, if it worked to kill Corbyn, we can probably use it to destroy Bernie. The man's a Jew,
Yeah. Like it's
Jewish
pretty
man.
insane.
And
Yeah. It's
yeah. So now apparently, yeah, Bernie is anti-Semitic, and also his Brexit position is going to get us all, uh, you know, killed or whatever.
yeah.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There's no Brexit happening here. That's the point,
No,
right?
no. But we should totally, because what Boris Johnson's plan is to leave the EU so they can have a trade deal with America. So what America should do in order to stop that is we should join the EU. So therefore, it foils their whole entire plan. Like
I
honestly,
like
that's what we
Oklahoma.
should do. But no. So second question I have here is, where did you grow up at?
Texas. I grew up in Houston,
Oh,
which
so now I have to
is
hate you now because I'm
is
from
that
Oklahoma.
so?
Yeah, because I'm
Was
from
it?
Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma. Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant Houston specifically. No, it's just because we're
No.
mortal enemies by state. Sure. I mean, from my end of that equation, I would. It's not even that I would hate you. It's I would insist that you don't exist or that your state is a boring rectangle or something like that. I guess that does make us mortal enemies. Um, Man, Oklahoma. What is that like?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I would assume it's like Texas, but like not Texas, because our football teams are better here, and our basketball teams are better here, and but our Republicans are worse here. So I'll definitely give you that one. Like your Republicans are better because from what I can see, I mean they're still pretty crazy over there, but you know they're not ours.
Maybe that's an even trade. I don't know. I'm gonna have to disagree with you on the basketball thing because I mean we have the Rockets and the Spurs. I don't fucks with no Dallas shit though, so I won't be defending them. But I Oklahoma's funny to me because I go through there on tour every once in a while, and I have some friends that are comedians out in like OKC, and we do the show, and then we hang out afterwards. And I go, "It's been a year since I've been here. What's been going on?" And they're always just like nothing. Like there's no answer to that question. They're always just kind of like, "Yeah, it's just this again for 365 more days." It seems like a place where people are very unenthusiastic about the place, which I can, that's cool. I can relate to.
Yeah,
Having regional pride's kind of stupid. But I
yeah.
grew up in Houston. I actually grew up in the same neighborhood as or I went to the same middle school as Lizzo, like at the
Oh,
same
okay.
time.
Well, that's
Yeah,
cool.
I found that out a while back, and then I like looked into it, and I was like, oh, I think I vaguely remember. Like she had a gang called the Cornrow Clique, not a gang, but like like a cute thing that some middle school kids did.
Hmm.
And yeah, so like I grew up in Texas, but in a city and a pretty diverse city for that matter. And then you know, packed up and went to college in Austin and lived in that part of Texas, which is much more of like a white bread, middle class kind of like lame arts town.
Hmm.
It's, I mean, I like it a lot, but the older I get, the more I realize stuff about it. I'm a little bit less enamored with these like cute, um, you know, college towns across the country.
Hmm.
And then I moved to New York, like, you know, when I was 27 or so. I'm like 32 now, so it was like 5, 6 years, something like that. But I am on the road a lot doing stand up, so I live everywhere now, or at least everywhere in the U.S.
What made you want to become a comedian?
Um, I don't know. It's something. I started when I was young. I'm like 32, and I started when I was like 19 or something like that. And so, like, it's hard to even remember, but I think it was something I was drawn to and fixated on real early. Um, I grew up watching stand-up comedy on like Comedy Central. I was kind of a
Hmm.
latchkey kid, and so like I took in a lot of TV, and it really spoke to me. And I also watched like a lot of old comedy stuff, like on like Nick at Night when I was a kid. So I was like
Yeah.
10 years old watching like sitcoms from the 70s and stuff, and like something about just like comedy itself really spoke to me. And but then I was a little bit older. I got into like music and punk rock and stuff like that. And I think it took me a while to synthesize those two things and realize like, oh, I don't like I'm not like good at music. It doesn't like come out of me.
Hmm.
Uh, it's not as like natural. Like I like comedy, but then I like the ethics and all the history and like the material history of like indie rock and stuff like that. And so like a lot of comedians of my age, I had a moment where those two things just overlapped in my head, and I was like, oh my god, what if we, what if I did comedy but I did it like this? What if I used like punk rock and stuff like that as a framework for how to do this thing, and then bing bang boom, that's where me and probably a few hundred other comedians came from. um a lot of people of my generation, I think, have that similar story. um but I don't know, I mean, I liked it when I was a kid, and then again when I was like a young adult. It The art form itself, but also like the community and the scene sort of like offered a lot to me.
Hmm.
So it's now inextricably, my life is all revolves around it. I don't know. I just love it.
That's cool. Who's your favorite comedian of all time, or maybe top five comedians?
Um, that's an interesting question because, like, I don't think I've ever really had like one, like, I just totally stand this person and that's the end all be all of it. But I always do have like, a, a few answers to that question, and definitely like top fives or top sixes or top tens. So, I mean, off the top of my head, like, you know, I've been kind of fixated on Lenny Bruce recently, and because like, me and him have that thing in common with the government, which is cool, and he's got such an interesting story. That being said, he's from so far in the past that his comedy itself is like indecipherable. Like it's not really
Hmm.
funny, but I think like him and Carlin are people that are like important to what comedy is and the tradition of stand up and um, how it's played a role in society. Bill Hicks, I would argue, is a similar story, but he's so not funny, and people insist that he is, that it's a little grating to me, being from Texas where he's a god. But
Hmm.
I mean, I love Dave Chappelle. Not so much these days, although I think he's still like, he's still great, but like he's just, we're watching him kind of get old, and so like, the fact that he can't stop talking about the trans stuff is like weird.
Yeah.
But as someone who's truly loves the craft of comedy, you know, I'll never not be. I can watch for what it's worth, like any day of the year.
Hmm.
Um, or what the fuck is that other special? The name's not coming to me. Anyway, but his early stuff, is incredible. And like Patton Oswalt's somebody who just like stylistically I've always been amazed by. He was a big influence on me coming up because he's got like that weird English majors approach to stand up where he's very into like I admire him as a writer, I guess. He's somebody who's able to do stand up in like paragraph form as opposed to one liner jokes or something like that. He's like able to
Hmm.
use a lot of imagery and stuff like that, and you can tell like, well, this is a guy who probably just consumes tons and tons of like novels and stuff like that, and is really into like words and like literary techniques and being able to describe things. um Another one that's kind of funny is man, I was just telling somebody the other day that I did a spot on a show where I was opening for Eddie Pepitone a while back, and it's funny to me because I think he's like one of the greatest living comedians right now, but he's just not
Hmm.
like that famous. So like, I just did a spot on a show like in some weird ass town with him a while back, and like the room was like half filled, and he was incredible to watch. He like didn't flinch for a minute. He just used the situation to like do what he does, which is largely improvisational, and it was insane. But like for how good of a comedian I think he is, I think the guy should be playing freaking sold out theaters, and it's but it's a pirate's life for the most of us. So
Hmm.
he's just in a fucking half empty bar. Um, And then the other answer to that, the final answer, is an answer I will crib from a backpack rapper I enjoy a lot named Aesop Rock. I don't know if you're into that guy. He I read an interview with him a long time ago, and something he always said stuck with me, which is somebody asked him, "Who are your favorite rappers?" And his answer was like, "My friends," which is like, if you're actively making something, yeah, most of the best jokes I know are not like the types of things that are on my mind that I would relate to you or relay to you and go like, "Oh, I heard the funniest thing the other day." Isn't going to be from somebody that's famous. The people I admire most are the people that I'm working around all the time because I have to watch them do what they do. So a bunch of unsuccessful motherfuckers here in Brooklyn and back in Austin and around the country.
That's cool. Do you have a favorite comedy special that you've ever seen, or a favorite? Yeah, I think that's how I say it. Yeah, special. It's comedy special.
Well, off the top of my head, if anyone is curious about Pepitone, who I was just talking about, Eddie Pepitone, I just re-listened to his album he put out in 2015. It's called In Ruins, and I highly recommend it to anyone that's curious about slightly weirder comedy. Also for leftists, because there is this their political nerds have this kind of understanding of like art that kind of bothers me, where they think that it should be overt and propagandistic. And you can do that sort of thing. You can write a folk song or a protest song or something like that, but I don't think that is how art necessarily should function all the time or even most of the time. And I do think you're a bit of a nerd if you insist on that being a thing, right? And so that's why, like, there are people that are like, radical politics, I'm the radical politics comedian, and they're very overt about it, and I think it's kind of lame. Like, it's cool for what it is. Like, I do that on my podcast because that's the express statement of the podcast. The mission of the podcast is like, it's going to be about this type of politics, right? But people come out and see me sometimes, and I think that they're a little bit like I get like politics nerds, like, online tankies and people with the hammer and sickle in their name and stuff. And I think they're a little bit thrown off because my act isn't hello comrades. It's not like very like overt.
Yeah.
But there's still politics in what I'm talking about. They're just embedded in it, right? And so I think Eddie Pepitone's album or his special In Ruins is a good example of somebody who clearly like reads Chomsky and shit, but isn't beating you over the head with it. And it's more that his good politics, because I've talked to him about this a little bit, and I was right, and it makes sense if you have a trained ear and you listen to his stuff. But it's like, yeah, he has all these good opinions, but those opinions inform his point of view when he writes jokes. And so it's like backloaded instead of front loaded or whatever, I guess. That's what I'm saying. And that's special, man. I just fucking listened to it a while back, and I really like it. And I really like to recommend it to people because it came out in 2015. So it obviously was written in the years leading up to 2015. And it's very prescient of Trump and like all the stuff that's happening. And it's, the album itself is very much like the theme of it is apocalyptic stuff. It's like shit is all going down. We were all going to die. We're going to be in this apocalyptic wasteland in like a year. And he was fucking right. And and he just does all these jokes on it about like, a good example of one that's really funny to me is he's just imagining like a woman on The Price is Right, but the thing that she has to guess the price of is the Iraq War. And and then the joke is just her looking back at the audience and just going like, even more than that, and they're just like, yeah, even more than that. All this stuff that's like relevant to what we're talking about now. Anyway, In Ruins, oddly prescient, man. He talks about the manufacturing base falling out, but in a really funny way that predicts Trump. Really cool. Also, I think Patton Oswalt's Werewolves and Lollipops is like gonna forever be one of my top 3 stand-up albums. It was recorded in Austin right when I was starting, and like everything I was saying earlier about the descriptive stuff is just like incredible. And then like this should probably go without saying if you're into stand-up comedy, but like any of Mitch Hedberg's stuff is just like evergreen. Who else? Oh man, Brent Weinbach is a guy who, like, if you're into like weird Adult Swim like psychedelic stuff right now,
Hmm.
he's somebody you might go back and look at, because I think he informed like the Eric Andres and that sort of type people of today. Even he might even be precursor to, like, well, he's probably contemporary with them, but also it's like the Tim and Eric type like really freaky comedy.
Hmm.
Um, but I could go on forever.
All right. What kind of music did you listen to while growing up?
Um, that's an interesting one. I am man, I'm curious about that about you, to be honest with you, because all this like these new metal vibes. Um, but I mean that Limp Bizkit album, that the art is on the wall behind you, was the first album I ever bought with my own money. Um, and I
How much did it
remember,
cost back then?
I don't remember, but I mean, it was definitely something that if I think about it now, I'd be like, good lord, because like,
Yeah,
because
because
music
like
is essentially
I
free.
bought it. I bought it. The CD. I remember the day too. It was July 4th, 2013, and I bought it at Best Buy for 9.99. I was like, hey, it was right before we went to the zoo, because we went to the zoo for the 4th of July that day before we went to my cousin's house, and I was like, hey, like I want to get this. Like, could we go by Best Buy? I feel like we also went to Best Buy for something else, but like I remember this specifically, and I was like, I know they have the CD there, so I'm gonna get it, and then I got it, and but yeah, it was like $10 for me. But like at other places, CDs were like 15, 16, $17. I was like, whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean, God, I remember buying like box sets and shit for like $40 at one point during, CDs being a thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I remember buying that album and kind of going down that road because I, heard that music on the radio
hmm.
and really didn't, I mean, it's not really like music that I still listen to. It was more of the start of a little journey for me, but I didn't really find anything that really spoke to me until, for some reason, I had a friend, right, who had like a cousin who lived kind of further out in the suburbs and went to school with like middle class people, and
Hmm.
this guy was our gateway into punk, I think, and like indie rock, and like that guy was the first. He was like my link to being able to hear like Modest Mouse for the first time and stuff like that. I remember he passed me a copy of the Strokes album when it came out in like 2000 or 2001 or whatever,
Hmm.
1999, what the fuck that year was. Um, and like from there, I think I got really heavy into like at the drive-in, like ironically, given it sucks to think about now because fucking Beto's so milk toast and lame, but that like El Paso centered punk scene was really cool,
Hmm.
and yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, I kind of went all over the place. Like, I think punk was really where my like where everything is centered around for me, but I mean, also as I got older, kind of developed like more nuanced tastes in hip hop. Hip
Hmm.
hop's kind of interesting to me because like I grew up actually in like a mostly black and brown neighborhood, and but I as a nerd though, and so I think something I figured out like after I left Houston and sort of like became way more class conscious and stuff is that like I think I used to think hip hop was dumb, and not dumb, but like Houston rap is dumb as shit. Like it is though, but it's dumb on purpose. And somebody blew my mind when they explained this to me at one point. Like Houston rap, like Bun B and shit like that, is all
Hmm.
very like, it's like punk. It's like playing a song with like three power chords, right? And the reason it is because Bun B is just like dun 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 dun, I'm a da 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 da. You know, it's all like kind of riffing on the same phrases, like you know, what to do is like a big thing people say in Texas, and like you know, man, I'm for real, I'm all up in your grill, da 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 da. Right. Well, the reason that is because the point of it is that you can sit around and fucking hang out with your friends and freestyle on it. And it's really easy to freestyle if everything is just three verses that all rhyme in really, you know, dumb one syllable ways, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this is all shit that I didn't really understand when I was a kid. And, you know, I was a little bit afraid of some of the people that were like driving around banging this shit. And so I went and hung out with my fucking friends in the suburbs and got into their nerdy ass white people music, right? Then I came all the way back around and I kind of figured all this shit out and got like real into it, right? So, like, you know, I enjoy like Paul Wall and that era of shit, but like lately I've also been listening to like this guy Maxo Cream, you know, fuck with him at all. He's from my old neighborhood in Houston, and he's like incredible. Um, you know, so that's like a whole other branch of shit that I kind of go in and out of, and then like I don't know, man. I mean, also like being someone in New York, but who's from Texas. Um, I also like to kind of. I feel like I've got a unique perspective to some of my friends about country music, which is kind of weird
Mm-hmm.
because uh, it's a big secret. Like that, there's good shit, you know, and it's a well kept secret because there's so much fucking bad country music, and it's the most advertised and put on the radio of all of it, right? But like, I mean, at some point in your adult life, if you're somebody living in Texas, you might like discover, you know, Waylon Jennings or some weird shit like that, and like go down a real weird rabbit hole, and like, you know, that shit's like cool as fuck. And I tour with a guy who plays, you know, country adjacent singer songwriter stuff a lot, and so I like always learn about it in the van with him. A guy named Mishka Shubali, who's an incredible singer songwriter who's also kind of in the comedy circuit. Um, so like I don't know, man. I guess I'm all over the place, you know.
That's cool. Um, but no, well, you asked about me, so I'll go ahead and tell you a
Please.
little bit about my taste. So I'll say for me, um, when I was, let's see, I was in like fifth grade, sixth grade. I began listening to Lady Gaga and Eminem. And then for the most part of middle school, I mostly listened to Eminem and Lady Gaga. And then I bought after I pretty much was like into Eminem, I was like, okay, I want to get into other stuff. So I decided I'd get into Linkin Park because I remember hearing their songs when I was like a little kid, like 3, 4 years old. And so I bought Hybrid Theory, which is the first Linkin Park album, and I got into them. Plus, I got into Green Day for a brief moment, but that was pretty much over after the summer of 2012. Um, and then let's see here. And then when I got into high school, I stopped listening to rap music like pretty much at all, unless it was like Eminem or Insane Clown Posse. But even then, it was like only like occasionally, like whenever they put something new out, and I'm just like, okay. But then I got into Evanescence, Disturbed, Corn, and Slipknot. My no, not my senior year, my freshman year. This is like 2013, and ended up getting in the System of a Down that summer and Limp Bizkit. And then that's like when I figured out what the first Linkin Park album was. I figured out it was called nu metal. I went down the rabbit hole, figuring out what nu metal was, and I was like, oh, okay, this is really good stuff. And some of this stuff is familiar. I remember hearing it when I was like a little kid, and that's how I ended up getting into it. And pretty much spent my high school years being this big time nu metal kid in a time where nobody my age either listened to nu metal or knew what it was. Like if you listened to metal when you were like when I was in high school, like you were probably either listening to like deathcore or like metalcore or something like that. If you weren't listening to like the radio stuff, like Five Finger Death Punch or 3 Days Grace. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got into it. I still listen to that stuff nowadays, as you can tell. I listened
Yeah.
to Chevelle. I got into them also in high school. Um, but I've graduated to some other stuff since then, but I still listen to Limp Bizkit and Korn, and Slipknot and stuff like that. But I listen to Butcher Babies now, Bad Wolves. So yeah, also like Hatebreed. So yeah, but that's how I got into it. It was purely by
Cool.
accident, and then just tumbled on. So yeah.
Do you like a Street Fight listener?
You were talking about Murder Brian on
Yeah,
Twitter.
yeah,
I don't listen to Street Fight, but I listen to his other podcast, the POD Cast.
yeah. Okay, I mean that's what I was gonna recommend.
Yeah,
Sounds like it'd be up your alley.
yeah, I listen to that. I've listened to that. They're pretty cool. Talking about that old stuff. But yeah, it's funny because like when they talk about it, like they sound like a bunch of old people. I'm just like, wow, like now I know how my friends in high school felt whenever I'd bring up this stuff, even though like most of the time they wouldn't even know what I was talking about. They'd just be like, "Oh, that's cool, Greg. Okay." And now I'm kind of like that way with them. I'm like, "Okay, that's weird, but go ahead." Yeah.
Cool,
Uh,
man.
let's see here. So would you say you have a favorite music artist or just like a handful of them or something like that?
Um, man. Yeah, I mean, the older you get, like, I feel like you have less of a like. I don't know a lot of adults that are just like, I love this one thing or whatever. Or you got like this
Hmm.
one big. It's a very high school thing to have a poster on your wall, or like your MySpace top five or whatever. I don't know how old you are if you were around for that. You used to be able
I
to
was
make
not
us.
around. Well, I didn't have social media when I was in high school, in middle school, but like in middle school, MySpace was a thing. Yeah, so I
Yeah.
kind of know what you're talking about.
I mean, I was already out of high school, like when MySpace was a thing, and like, but it does. I guess it still does remind me of a bygone era, like both in history, but also in like my life when I would be like, this band is the greatest band of all time. But like nowadays, and also because I work with musicians sometimes and stuff, and I also like um have to make playlists for like back when I was bartending, like I'd have to really really just like get really into music and try to DJ a little bit with it while I was working. It's this big vast landscape that I feel like I'm constantly exploring, and so you might stumble upon something and then there's just like a whole world in there that you spend like a week or two just like really really digging into and learning everything about, and then you move on and then you go to the next thing. So there's a million answers to this, but like off the top of my head, somebody I appreciate quite a bit and also I see around a lot because I'm in New York is a guy named Jeff Rosenstock, who was in like it's almost like ska adjacent, like garage punk bands back in the day, but then like kind of evolved into uh somebody who writes like I don't know, like just really kind of passionate like punk music with like gang vocals and stuff that's just about like being broke and shit. Um got a great new album called Post where he has a song called USA that's just uh I don't know, it's very encapsulating of the times. He's just a very prolific songwriter, but somebody who writes it in the medium of um not easy to play punk. You know what my favorite shit right now is? It's this. I'll tell you. Um okay, so like akin to your interest in new metal, I guess for me when I was like a teenager, I was really into like pop punk, I guess.
Oh yeah.
Um yeah, and it's like punk people are hilarious because I always try to fucking tell you they only ever like the coolest music ever. Oh, the first album I ever bought was The Clash. Oh, fuck you, you're lying. Um, I listened to a lot of stuff that I can't really stomach anymore, you know. But like when I was a teenager, I used to go to the Vans Warped Tour and watch, you know, fucking Less Than Jake and Rancid and shit like that. And although I still listen to Rancid here and there, I guess. But I feel like a lot of people my age liked that sort of music and played that sort of music, and then we grew up. So now there are these bands that use that medium to make music, but it's more sophisticated and it's a little bit like just sonically like more skillful. And it's also about better shit, right? So like I'll give you an example of this. There's a band called Reviver I like quite a bit. RVIVR, no E's for some reason. And like I saw them live a while back. They fucking shred. It's like a trans woman, and it's a trans woman who's like, you could tell transition probably a little bit later into her life because she's kind of big, and then there's like this little tiny queer small bean chick playing bass, and they're just fucking shredding, and they're playing songs that are like melodic and evocative of the intensity and the dramatic nature of like emo music from, you know, 10 years ago or whatever. But all that music from that era was like, it was basically all just shitty dudes whining about how some woman wouldn't have sex with them, right? So the content of those songs is what made them suck. The guitars were cool, but the content sucked, right? Well, Reviver is angst coming from people who probably more justifiably have an angsty story to tell, which is a trans woman and some weird queer woman, and they're singing about, you know, just other things, you know, the things that are actually more justifiable to have that hard feelings about, you know. I don't probably ever want to hear a guy whining about how some woman won't fuck him through a guitar and a microphone ever again. Like that type of music is just gone. But the way like a band like that plays now, I fucking love. And that whole genre of music is just something I'm still into. Like it's a band called Hop Along I like quite a bit. Charlie Bliss is really good. Like I guess right now I'm really into like garage stuff. Like Burger Records is a record label that puts out a lot of good shit. I think they put out Shannon and the Clams. There's another band I like a lot. If you've never heard them, they're great. They're like, you know, like crunchy guitars, but then like mixed with like soul and doo-wop and stuff like that. It's really good.
Okay.
The hell was the original question? I forgot.
It was what is your favorite music artist or top few artists?
Yeah, I mean, Shannon and the Clams are great. Rosenstock's great. My buddy Mishka that I tour with, I mean, I tour with him, but he's also one of my favorite musicians of fucking all time. He's the guy who plays kind of more country adjacent stuff. Oh, you know, and another one I would say actually is still close to my heart in that high school way is Titus Andronicus is a band from up here that is like, yeah, like kind of like what I was saying before. Like it's like punk music, but it's like it's grown up and smart and adjacent to like the Hold Steady, and they make concept albums about manic depression and shit like that. And I'll listen to fucking anything they put out ever. I'm a huge fan.
It's cool. What made you become a socialist, or what helped develop your politics?
You know, it's like a big, complicated stew, I'd say, because the short answer for anyone is usually something like Occupy or Bernie or something like that. But, you know, those moments that come along in your life, it only happens because they catalyze feelings or elements of a worldview that you already had kind of going around in your head. And then you go, holy shit, maybe I should look into this a little bit more because it looks like this thing is manifesting in reality, you know? So like, you know, part of it is just like, there's like a term people use a lot that I enjoy, which is, you know, if you're talking to somebody else and you're trying to convince them of some sort of socialist politics, tell them you're a socialist and you don't know it, right? And I feel like I started off there. Like I think about this all the time. When I was a kid, I just assumed that that the hospital was free, And I assumed that because I grew up around fucking some patriotic people that were like constantly talking about how America is like this, the greatest country of all time, and like we have all this money and shit. And so I think a fair assumption would be like, well then, you know, then the
Yeah.
hospital's probably like the library, right? And then had to learn, like, as an adult, like why it's not. And
Hmm.
so I'm like, a lot of this is just like, you know, like intuitive, I think. Socialism is kind of intuitive. The specifics and the specific tendencies and government types and shit like that come, further into reading about it or not. But like the basic concept is it's pretty dumb. It's like pretty easy. It's pretty obvious. But that being said, like I read Marx in high school, and I read a lot of Howard Zinn in high school, and also, frankly, learned shit from the punk music. Man, I listened to like
Yeah.
propaganda stuff, and I listened to that Choking Victim album where they have that one intellectual. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but he's like fucking Chomsky-ish sort of guy, just interspersed in the music, and couldn't help but at least be encouraged on some level to think about that sort of stuff through the culture. So that's cool, and that's good that people do stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, it also comes with like being alive on this planet long enough and having to deal with a hospital bill or something like that. um and I mean, when I was in Austin, I just started asking the question of like, well, why the hell don't we have health insurance? And discovered like one thing that was kind of radicalizing for me is fucking as a comedian, I discovered this fucking thing in Austin where there was health insurance specifically like for musicians, and I went to the
Mm.
organization that like put this together and looked into how it worked, and it's bad. Like it's good. I mean, it's good. Like everyone should have health insurance, so these people should too. But I remember applying for it and then going, well, you're not a musician, and I was like, well, yeah, but like, why is the line drawn here? And it caused me to
Hmm.
start thinking about, wait a minute, why is there a line at all? Like, why isn't there just fucking universal health insurance, right? And so this experience I had, like investigating this thing called the Health Alliance for Austin Musicians in Austin, and asking questions like, why do we have a system where wealthy people, you know, donate specifically to a certain type of artist that they like to, in exchange for like creating culture of certain kinds or whatever that supposedly benefits the city. All this stuff made me understand this vague thing that we now know as neoliberalism, I guess. It's a very lame neoliberal concept, I think. The idea that we as artists should rely on the good graces of our billionaires and millionaires and philanthropists is the word I was searching for.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, all this stuff has been stuff that's been on my mind, and luckily it wasn't really indoctrinated too heavily in any direction when I was a kid. I went to like a weird magnet school where I think they were pretty open to, go learn, like read Marx if you're in high school, do whatever the fuck you want, and yeah, and then like I don't know, Occupy happened, and I can remember like being the only person I knew that was like, hey, holy shit, this thing's going on. Because with comedians, it's very cool to be cynical and like a nihilist, basically.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember reading a little bit more into it from there. And then as soon as Bernie launched, like in 20, whatever, 15 or whatever, um, I just suddenly snapped out of my apathy, I guess, and immediately started reading as much as possible about all this. And I got really interested in Bernie. And then when he lost, I think that's probably when the world changed, and suddenly it felt like, holy shit. Well, actually, okay. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I've been thinking about this a lot. I'm trying to
Yeah.
articulate this. Because I was a comedian when Bernie lost, I felt
Hmm.
like your job as a comedian kind of is to be somebody who comments on society, right? So you should understand society. And when Trump won, I looked at a lot of other comedians around me and was like, these people are going to just lie about they're not going to do their homework. They're just going to try to
Mm-hmm.
make up some explanation for why this happened. And they're probably going to do really well because the audience also isn't going to try to figure out why this happened. And then that's just what comedy is going to be. And I immediately lost interest in that. And I was like, I would like to actually, if I am somebody who is fucking arrogant enough to stand in one end of a room with a microphone and talk to people and talk down to them about, why things are the way they are, I would like to know what the fuck I'm talking about. And so I just started like, doing DIY college to myself after that and just like reading as much as possible and shit. And like, I was a bartender and I like stopped tending bar because I realized that if I took a job delivering pizzas, I could wear headphones and like take in audiobooks like
Mm-hmm.
while I was working. And that all helped with the launching of like my podcast and stuff like that. But I did it because I was like, man, I don't feel good like not knowing what the fuck's going on, especially if I'm supposed to be a comedian.
Yeah.
So yeah, that led into a little bit just because like I don't feel like it's responsible to check out right now,
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's see. All right. So, would you like to talk about the time that the FBI came to your place with because of the joke you told on Twitter a couple of years ago?
Yeah, sure. Was not the FBI, it was Homeland Security.
Homeland Security. Okay. Yeah.
They're all different organizations. It's important for us to know this as leftists. But also because they all have different like jobs in theory and different functions,
Mm-hmm.
So Homeland Security is really funny because Homeland Security is the one that George W. Bush came up with.
Yeah.
And it was really funny to me because okay, so like one of the jobs I had a couple of years ago before this was I wrote TV recaps, which are just like those weird articles where people go, here's what happened this week on Game of Thrones or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And but I worked for somebody. I worked for the Observer, which was owned by Jared Kushner at the time, and I was new. I was low on the food chain at my job, so what would happen is I would have to watch shows that like nobody else wanted to watch. So I had to watch the TV show Homeland, which is about Homeland Security, for like 6 months because because they asked me to review season 5 of it, but I'd
Mm-hmm.
never seen the show before, so I had to watch seasons 1 through 4 like just shotgun style. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because when I met Homeland Security when they came to my apartment, I was like, "Holy shit, you look like they do on the show." It was really weird. Um, but to backtrack a little bit, if anybody wants the full story on this, just Google me. It's my thing that made me famous, so it should be easy to find. But basically, I was tweeting out this bit about cultural appropriation and, might have involved hypothetical violence against ICE agents, and it was a joke, but I got into a thing with the government, and they came to my house over it, and they asked me, "Hey, did you really mean that?" And I went, "No, it's a joke." And then we had a conversation about it, and I got to participate a little tiny bit in the tradition of comedy, being on the front lines of the free speech thing, which has happened before. Like I said, with Lenny Bruce and Carlin, they both had brushes with the government over the material they were doing. Lenny Bruce obviously got like dragged off the stage, put in handcuffs. Carlin, went toe to toe with the Supreme Court. And then this thing happened to me, and it both was and wasn't a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. Some people like to look at this and go like, wow, free speech is really under attack. And the thing is, like, I'm fine. They left me alone. But yeah, I guess it's summation, like the quick to catch anyone up, anyone who doesn't know this story. Yeah, I put this joke out. Joke was about how I think white people should be allowed to do cultural appropriation if they kill ICE agents, and it's just this long fucked up joke about that and like how funny it would be if we just let people do the weird racist stuff that they want to do as long as they actually like did anything in real life. And yeah, and then these three Homeland Security agents came to my apartment and we talked about it, and then I went on a bunch of podcasts and TV shows and stuff, and told my story, I guess. Um, I have a government file, I guess, for doing comedy, which is pretty crazy. This was a couple years ago.
Did you have to delete the tweet that you made, or the tweets, or have you deleted them?
That's the craziest thing, is that like they eventually got deleted, but it was like a week after this happened. So it makes me think like someone narked on me, like someone screenshotted it and sent it to them or something, because if someone had like just reported it to Twitter, Twitter would have just taken it down. That's usually what they do.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking from some lefty angle. If, you know, Twitter obviously famously has this fucking bias where, you know, if you're a white supremacist, they go, well, you know, free speech, right? And then if you're like talking about some shit I was talking about, they'll just take it down. Like, oh, that's offensive.
Yeah.
You know? And that's the thing about like free speech in general, just as a concept, is that it doesn't exist because everyone's got that bias. So it's easy to reframe anything as, well, this specifically is defended by free speech, but this isn't, you know. P.E. Moskowitz just wrote a book about that. It's called The Case Against Free Speech, and we did a talk on it at a bookstore here in New York. But it's really interesting, and if you look at the history of like the ACLU and just free speech in general as like a thing in America, yeah, it's never been agreed upon. It's always super malleable. So like, you know, I think like my story with Homeland Security is reflective of that. Because you know, because one thing that happened is that they came and they told me like, hey, you know, you could incite someone to be violent, you know, even if you think you're joking. And I told them like, you know, this is at the time at least was more of a good point because they hadn't been taken down yet. But like, I was like, what about like Roseanne and fucking Alex Jones, you know? And because at the time Alex Jones was just like peddling Pizzagate conspiracy theories and stuff on his platform before he got deplatformed. And you know, I looked at them and I was like, why the fuck are you coming after me and not this extremely famous person who has like influence over the
millions of people?
Yeah, the president.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I have for right now. Thank you for coming on. Where can we find you on social media and on the internet?
Okay, so my handle on everything is at Feral Jokes. It's just the letters of my name mixed around. It's called Anagram, Jake Flores, Feral Jokes, right? That's my website, and I put all my stuff on my Twitter is my main base of operation. Like I put my show dates and stuff up on the pinned tweet. So you can find me on all that stuff if you're curious about any of this crap. You can also listen to my podcast called Pod Damn America, which is a play on Pod Save America, obviously. And yeah, that's where me and two of my comic friends talk lefty socialist politics and like interview people and stuff and do jokes about that sort of stuff. I have another one called
It's certainly a better podcast than Pod Save America.
I appreciate it, although pretty low bar, huh?
True.
But yeah, so Pod Damn's great, and I also have a show called Why You Mad, which is a spin-off that I just started with my friend Louisa, who's an anthropologist, where we talk more like art history and stuff in relation to the comedy world. And that's about it. That's all my stuff.
All right, cool. Thanks, man. Really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, thanks, man. Anytime.